Hello, and welcome back to Mythic Sky Storytime. I'm Dr. Laura Tad, spiritually oriented psychological astrologer. This is my 10th show in a series I'm calling Cosmic Costumes, where I go through each of the zodiacal signs, looking at them from a mythological and psychological perspective. In this episode, I'll be discussing disciplined Capricorn. Capricorn is the fish goat, which sometimes gets confusing because depending on what you're looking at, it may just simply be depicted as a goat climbing up a mountain, but actually it's a creature that has a goat head and a fish body or a fish tail. And the glyph we use, the symbol that we use for Capricorn, is one of the more complicated ones to draw. I even know some astrologers who find it very difficult to accurately draw the glyph. In part, maybe because it's a curious creature. So the glyph is representative of the constellation Capricornus and is sometimes very directly interpreted as the fish goat. And other people see it as sort of a human kneeling and the knees being part of a sort of sharp angle that we see in the glyph, because the knees in astrology are associated with Capricorn. And as we get further in the episode, I'll talk more about that. In astrology, every sign is also associated with a planet. So with Capricorn, we see an archetypal parallel to the planet Saturn. And as I've said in previous episodes, now that I'm more than halfway through the zodiac, and at this point we're getting 3/4 of the way through the zodiac, the opposite sign, the polarity sign of Capricorn is Cancer. Capricorn begins winter, Cancer begins summer. So they are polar, at least in the northern hemisphere. Then you'd flip that for those of you in the southern hemisphere. But they are the polar opposite signs, the beginning of these seasons, summer and winter. And in addition to each sign having a planet that it's associated with, every sign in the zodiac is associated with qualities. And the primary qualities that we associate with a given sign are an elemental quality and a mode quality. And so in the case of Capricorn, we have a cardinal earth sign. Now, all cardinal signs launch seasons. So in the case of Capricorn, we have the last of the cardinal signs in the calendar year. Now, because they all launch seasons, they have parallels to them regardless of the element that they are, that I'll talk about in a moment. But cardinal signs have that initiatory energy to them because they launch seasons. It's about beginnings. So there's an independent quality to Capricorn that is different than the preceding sign of Sagittarius, that still has some independence to it for sure, but not necessarily initiatory. Cardinal signs are very seeking in that forward thinking, looking ahead, that starting at the beginning of the season energy. So there's this going forward, this beginning energy, reaching outward, striving that we see in Capricorn. In Capricorn, we tend to see it more in terms of striving for authority, striving for recognition. That initiatory energy also often has us then associate Capricorn with being action-oriented. That's part of that striving energy, that goal-oriented energy. It's both the start, but sort of not reaching the finish line necessarily. We see that in other signs, but headed towards a finish line, striving for completion, striving for accomplishment. As a cardinal sign, we also see Capricorn being vulnerable then to overreach, being overly authoritative, being overly controlling because it likes to control, but it can be that overreach, overstrive, overdoing. Feeling overly responsible is a big part of how Capricorn can be vulnerable to manifesting. It's very responsible, but can then tip into being overly responsible or feeling burdened by responsibility. So that can also lead to feeling overextended, overdoing, overcommitting, because Capricorn being an earth sign tied with being committed and loyal, and you pair that with that cardinal energy and we get overcommitment, overextension. So that earth quality, right? So pairing, and I've talked about that a little so far, but pairing that initiatory energy, that go-getting energy with earth that is not moving, compared to the other elements of air, fire, and water that all have some movement to them as an element, not even getting into the astrological piece of it, but just elementally. Air moves, fire dances, water flows. They all have movement. Earth does not, unless it interacts with the other element. But independent on its own, it's very stable. It's very stagnant potentially, but also just that consistency, right? So we see that with the earth signs. It helps to think about the element itself. It's not an accident as to what we attribute to the element astrologically and how the element engages in the natural world. So Capricorn being that dependable sign, being a dependable energy, because earth is solid, earth is consistent. We see that stability in Capricorn being part of the stability of earth as an element. That there can be a real practical and dependable quality that we see in Capricorn because it has that consistency, that solid foundation of the element helps that responsible, striving part of Capricorn to be dependable. Capricorn will stand its ground. All the earth signs have that piece, but when you mix that with the cardinal, which Capricorn is the only cardinal earth sign, then you have the responsible energy, that merging of the go-getter and dependable. And then you see it manifesting in terms of responsibility, or as I said before, being vulnerable to being overly responsible, feeling like if you don't hold the foundation, no one else will. So that can be some of the shadow that we see with Capricorn. Capricorn in that earth component then, because it's dependable, because it's sometimes even unmoving, unyielding, can be cautious to engage because it doesn't know how to do so in a way that allows for a lot of course correction or change. It can be vulnerable, and I think in some ways all the cardinal signs have this, of horse blinders, of there's a specific way that we're headed and I don't see how to deviate from that. I think that's particularly true with Capricorn when you merge that cardinal energy with earth of that singular track. This is the road I'm on, and not knowing how to deviate, but not being cognizant, not being aware that there's other possibilities, almost vulnerable to being stuck in a rut, we can see in Capricorn. But it does have that dependable energy. It does have that responsible energy, that being very comfortable being in a place of authority. It has its benefits. It's having a healthy relationship with authority, having a healthy relationship with boundaries. Boundaries are really good, very earth-oriented. They're very needed in life, but you don't want them to be too rigid. And Capricorn can be vulnerable when it's out of balance of the boundaries that it loves to being caught in a rut. The boundaries are so impenetrable that we don't know how to move out of them. So the sign is learning how to navigate the world, to have the boundaries that are healthy, the guardrails that are supportive, but still being willing to explore, which is not very much Capricorn's wheelhouse. It's learning to be more comfortable with that. And it's polarity to Cancer that moves very differently because it's a water sign, even though it's a cardinal sign and it's polarity. It can learn from the going sideways energy that we see with Cancer, because Cancer is governed by the crab. Crabs walk sideways. That is what can help Capricorn to get out of the rut, get out of a habitual way of operating in the world. Even though having a routine, which is very Capricorn oriented, having structure has its benefits. You don't want to get stuck in a routine where life only becomes routine and makes it more challenging to access joy. So one of the things that's helpful in understanding Capricorn, before I get into some more detail about it, is its relationship with the planet Saturn. Because in astrology, we do interweave and draw parallels to planets and the signs. Archetypally, there's a lot of cross-referencing, cross-storying that we see. And because the planets are named after deities, it can be helpful. You almost personify or anthropomorphize the sign. It can be easier to wrap our heads around what can feel like a very abstract concept. So Saturn is really the last planet that's visible with the naked eye. On very rare occasions, in very rare short periods of time, we might be able to see Uranus with the naked eye. But generally speaking, it's really just Saturn. And that's why the ancients, our ancestors, ended the planetary narrative with Saturn, because it wasn't until we had the telescope that we could see Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and beyond. So that barrier that we associate with Capricorn is reflected in Saturn being the barrier of the part of the cosmos that we can see without a telescope. Now, in mythology, Kronos in the Greek myths is the father of the gods. So that's part of that authority, responsibility, elder energy that we associate with Capricorn. That is who Saturn or Kronos was. In astrology, when we're looking at Saturn, Saturn has a cyclical pattern to it. So it moves slower than what we call personal planets, because it resides in a sign for about 2.5 years, as opposed to even Mars that moves slower than Mercury, that Mars is in a sign for maybe 2 months. So Saturn there for 2.5 years, while it's not generational like we saw with Pluto and the sign of Scorpio, where it can be in a sign of decades, that with Saturn, it's social because it's about 2.5 years. So it's not generational, but it's not personal in terms of the sign that it resides in. So there's that cyclical 28 to 30 year cycle that we see with Saturn. So when somebody refers to a Saturn return, what they are talking about is Saturn returning to where it was when they were born, or where it was when an event occurred, which is that 28 to 30 year time period. Another thing that can be helpful in understanding Saturn and then Capricorn is, at least in English, it works out very succinctly, which is also very Capricornian, that words that start with ST in English very much parallel what we see associated, or how we understand both Saturn and Capricorn. So standing, stability, standard, stature, steadfast, staying, stalling, steadiness, all of that energy, all of those words we have in English are very much parallel in terms of what Saturn represents and then what we see to be reflective in the sign of Capricorn. So then tying that understanding of Saturn, and Saturn being the elder, being the father of the gods, that then can manifest in present day time, right? Is the elder our parents, grandparents, but also people in a place of authority, bosses, politicians, anyone who has authority in our lives fits into that archetypal definition of Saturn. So as we merge some of that, right? So now we're blending the element, the mode, the planetary understanding. All of that then gets interwoven and cross-pollinated to really give us the bigger picture of what Capricorn represents. And so here then we see Capricorn's key phrase is I achieve. That's that striving energy that we see in its cardinality, blended with that earth of slow and steady wins the race, the tortoise versus the hare approach to life. So with Capricorn, we see ancestors and authority. as part of what Capricorn represents. And not just, even though historically it's often thought of like grandfather and even governing father time, if we take gender out of the equation, it still is applicable. So it's all ancestors, grandparents, grandmothers, grandfathers, the elder, the wise sage in some ways that we see in Capricorn. It's just the elder, the one who's speaking with authority. It's not just book knowledge, but lived experience. As I've spoken about, Capricorn loves boundaries. It loves to contain. It's the building sign of the zodiac in some ways. So that structural energy that physically creates boundaries in building. Capricorn can then also, in its hardworking, responsible energy, feel burdened. That can be how it tips into feeling overly responsible or taking on responsibilities that are not actually theirs. That attitude, if I don't do it right, nobody else will. Not coming from a place of drive as much as burden can be a vulnerability for Capricorn. There's a conditioned and conditioning quality to Capricorn. That's part of it being tied to authority and ancestry is, well, this is how it's always been done, so why would we deviate? Again, circling back to that idea of sort of being on this track, why would we deviate? This is how we've always done things. This is the set model. This is the blueprint, and struggling to envision something new that we'll get to when we get into Aquarius, that is the following sign, and every sign is in response to the previous. So the conditioned, single-minded, horse-blinder approach of Capricorn gets upended in the next sign. Capricorn also is tied with discipline. That's, again, circling back to this idea of authority. It's very goal-oriented, wanting things to be done, we see it in some ways with all the earth signs of having a checklist of things to get done. In it being tied to authority, a out of balance Capricorn energy can manifest as being insecure, because if where we have Capricorn, we don't feel like we have authority, we don't connect with our own expertise, then it can be inverted and be experienced as insecurity. I don't have the authority to speak. Wanting to, maybe desiring to be in a place of authority, but questioning if we're there yet, or maybe we're not. Maybe there's more we need to do to become the expert, and an out of balance Capricornian energy becomes insecure or afraid of stepping into that authority role. So sometimes that can manifest in that insecurity as isolating oneself, as limiting oneself. We also see that reflected in the myths of Saturn, where Saturn is banished as Kronos in the myths when his children take over after the War of the Titans. So there is that isolation or limiting energy or experience that Capricorn can emanate when it is out of balance. And isolation doesn't have to be bad. You can see that again in its relationship to Cancer, sort of that hermiting, the hermit crab, that sometimes going inward temporarily to regroup, to build up one's energetic reserves has its benefits. You don't want to get stuck there. So isolating when it isn't too long, isolating when we have a healthy relationship with why we are removing ourselves from engaging has its benefits. It becomes problematic when it is an avoidant strategy, when it's purely self-defense. So one of the other things we see with Capricorn being associated with elders and ancestry is it's very much about maturity and old age. So that part of us ultimately, as we mature, stepping more and more into the role of the elder ourselves. That as we get older, eventually we go from looking outward for authority to becoming the authority, to becoming the elder. So we see Capricorn representative of that as well. There's a real productive quality to Capricorn. Capricorn being that fish goat that sometimes is understood that it will do what it has to do to achieve its goals. So maybe what it needs to be is the goat that's climbing up the mountain, and maybe what it needs to be is the fish that swims to the bottom of the ocean. There's a productivity quality to Capricorn and this hard working, doing whatever is required to get the goals accomplished. Part of that then is how we see Capricorn being the provider in that hardworking energy. Sometimes it's understood that polarity of Cancer versus Capricorn is Cancer being archetypal mama energy, Capricorn being archetypal father energy. Is Cancer I'm going to be the parent that shows you that I love you by nurturing you and being present and making meals, versus Capricorn that is, I'm going to show you that I love you by providing for you. So sometimes we see that being part of how Capricorn manifests in its relationship, in particular to its polarity to Cancer. In general, with Capricorn, we can see a reserved quality. Part of that is that goal-oriented, work-oriented, potentially workaholic-oriented energy can be seen sometimes as reserved, as serious, as overly serious, as struggling to play because it feels so responsible that finding how to interweave freedom and play is not really in Capricorn's wheelhouse. So just like Aquarius breaks the mold of Capricorn in terms of conformity, Capricorn is in response to the previous sign of Sagittarius that's all about freedom, that's all about not taking life as seriously, that is not reserved. And so Capricorn comes in response or almost in reaction to the potentially overly gregarious, overly adventurous Sagittarius, and reins things in. And that's where we see that sort of reserved, serious rigidity that Capricorn can be vulnerable to. It is very resourceful, though, as a sign. That's part of that, like mining things for whatever tools are needed to accomplish the goal. So again, that idea of it being this duality of a creature that could climb or swim. There's a resourcefulness of Capricorn of doing whatever is needed to accomplish the goal, to get things done, to reach the goal, to be in a place of authority, whatever Capricorn is striving for in that cardinal energy, being very resourceful in how it goes about accomplishing that goal. And so with that, there can be some real self-mastery that we see with Capricorn and independence of, I'm going to get there with or without you. And often without you can be how Capricorn manifests. In its relationship to authority, sometimes Capricorn can become attached to status, as wanting to be seen as an authority. Not simply that it is an authority or put in a position where one has authority, but attached to that authority being acknowledged, being recognized, being perceived as the one who is in charge at a minimum, if not actually being the one who's in control, which is very Capricornian. In it being linked with ancestry and authority and being father time in its relationship to Saturn, there's a big piece of Capricorn that's also about tradition. It's about how things have always been done, which I alluded to a little bit before. And again, in its relationship to tradition, we can see its polarity to Cancer that governs family, and often more family of origin, where we come from. So that polarity with the tradition and the Cancerian family is family tradition. So the family unit might be more Cancerian, but the tradition of how the family has interacted with each other and engaged with the world, we would see more in Capricorn. So as I've talked about in other episodes, every sign of the zodiac governs a part of the body. And that's part of how medical astrologers work. And so now in the realm of Capricorn, we get into our knees and our skeletal system, right? If Capricorn is the builder, the structure, it's related to structure and building. That is our structure as humans. Our skeletal system is our system. It's our building block. And so people who have a lot of Capricorn may be vulnerable to skeletal issues or have something unique about their skeleton, and issues with the knees, because the knees are what creates stability. Again, that relationships to Saturn and Capricorn. Knees hold us up. Knees link with our stability in the rest of our body, the rest of our skeleton. In alternative medicine and integrative medicine, it's often thought that if we are having knee issues, it can be a manifestation or a reflection of that there's somewhere in life that we are feeling burdened by or overly responsible, and it is manifesting as knee pain because we are feeling burdened, which can be that Capricornian energy, to hold up things or hold things together that maybe we need to outsource or delegate, which can be Capricorn, and find support from others so we don't need to hold it all up on our own. So shifting now, looking at, as I've done in previous episodes, of Capricorn through the lens of psychosocial development. And we've been going sequentially through the signs and also through ages of life. And it's not that we aren't in these psychosocial development phases at earlier times or later times in life, but it's that there are specific phases of human development that reflect Capricorn as a sign. Having shifted now into Capricorn, we're getting into mid-50s, early 60s. And so we're in some ways in this space between midlife and elder, because it's sort of the very, very early phases of being an elder. And we can even see that reflected in the fact that that Saturn return that I talked about earlier, the first one happens at about 30, second one happens at about 60. So we go through that second Saturn return during the phase of life that I see to parallel Capricorn as an archetype. So during our 50s and 60s is when we really begin to think about what will outlive us. What are we leaving behind? The early beginnings to reflect on what have we done with our life so far and what do we want to do with the time we have left. And so that is part of that father time, Capricornian Saturnian energy, and goal-oriented. Okay, I'm now more than halfway through my life. What do I want to do with what I have left, the time I have left? What do I want to accomplish? What do I want to leave behind? And so we see that during this phase as reflective of the Capricorn Saturnian energy. It can also be a time when we are grappling with where we feel stuck or entrenched in the ways we have always done things. And do we stay there? Do we stay in habitual patterns? Do we stay in a routine that we have had perhaps for decades? Or do we start to build a new routine? Find new ways of new routines, what is been really beneficial in terms of routine and structure that we have had in our life, and where are we stuck or entrenched and doing things simply because it's how we've always done it, as opposed to it's what brings us joy, it's what has us feel expanded, it's what feels exciting and engaging to be a part of the world. During this period of time, it's also when we start strategizing more and more about retirement. Again, this idea of forward thinking, down the road thinking of how do I set myself up for success going forward. As we shift into this phase too, it is often a time where, and I've spoken about this some, we shift into more of the elder phase, the mentor or guide phase, to people who are younger than us, to people who are beginning their careers possibly. We become someone who is not just speaking about things in our lives or things we have done or suggestions for others that is book knowledge. We may have book knowledge to reference, but it is also coming from a place of lived experience. There's a degree of expertise that we find ourselves in as we begin the beginning phases of being an elder, is shifting into an expert in a different way than previously, where maybe we were an academic expert as opposed to a lived experience expert. An expert not just in our chosen profession, but maybe having more lived experience about interpersonal relationships that really only comes about by lived experience. You can read all kinds of books about relationships, but it is the actual boots on the ground lived experience that really gives you the sweat equity to be able to speak with a different level of authority. So we see that during this phase of life. So shifting gears, as I've done in previous episodes, I'm going to now tell you a little myth, because I do think, and this being Mythic Sky Storytime, that stories help us understand life, help us understand astrology, but just life in general. As humans, we have told stories for millennia to make sense of our world, to help us understand, to connect with other humans. And so I find myth a beneficial, or just storying in general, a beneficial way in to that. So for this show, I'm going to discuss Kronos, Saturn in the Roman pantheon. And partly because the story of Kronos is often more fleshed out than the Saturnian expression, and it's always referenced when looking at Saturn. So the story of Kronos is that he was the king of the Titans. The Titans were the sort of first generation of deities before the gods. So everything started with Uranus and Gaia, and their children, in part, were the Titans. And so Kronos is part of that first generation of Uranus and Gaia. So being the son of the sky god Uranus, the birth of Kronos brought forth the concept of linear time. Prior to Kronos, everything was amorphous. Everything was nonlinear. And with the advent of Kronos, we get linear time, which is why we associate him and Capricorn and Saturn with Father Time. And in addition to Kronos, other Titans and creatures came into existence as well. All the children of Uranus and Gaia. And as the story goes, with the blessing of his mother Gaia, Kronos is tasked with usurping his father. And the two of them, Gaia and Kronos, orchestrate a plan for Kronos to take over. And one night, when Uranus was distracted, Kronos castrates his father and strips him of his power. But he's not done with usurping his father just by doing that. He nonchalantly tosses his father's genitals into the sea. And from that action, from where they land, there begins to be a churning of foam of the sea. And from that foam is brought forth Aphrodite, or Venus, in the Roman pantheon. Right? So that's the imagery of the birth of Venus that's now very famous, is her being birthed out of the sea is the result of Kronos castrating his father and tossing his genitals into the sea. And things continue. This taking over of his father, usurping his father, begins to take more and more form. So now that he has castrated his father and stripped him of his power, Kronos is the one in charge of all the Titans, all the creatures, all the monsters, all of his siblings, for lack of a better word. However, having usurped his father, he lives in fear of a prophecy that he too will be overthrown by his own son. And fear is one of the things that we can sometimes see about Capricorn, about Saturn. So in that anxiety, in that fear of being usurped, he swallows each of his children as they are born, to ensure that there is no one who can usurp him, to ensure there is no one who can do to him what he did to his father. And distressed by his actions, his wife, Rhea, the mother of all of his children, begins to plot to bring forth the prediction, and also out of grief for what he is doing, and for all of her children have been eaten, she comes up with a plan. And so when her youngest is born, she hides him away, and rather than giving Kronos, her son, to be eaten, she wraps a stone in swaddling cloths and hands that to Kronos, who is operating with too much fear of being usurped to really pay attention to what she is handing him. And so he swallows the stone, thinking he's swallowed the most recent child. And Rhea, for her part, spirits away the young baby to the island of Crete, where he is raised by nymphs on goat milk and the goat Amathea, who is sometimes associated, even iconography-wise, with Capricorn. And this young baby, raised on Crete by nymphs and fed solely on goat milk, becomes Zeus. And just as it was predicted, when Zeus grows up, Jupiter in the Roman pantheon leaves Crete and forces his father to expel all of his swallowed offspring, all of Zeus's siblings. And this eventually leads to the War of the Titans, a battle for control between the two generations. Eventually, as you know, Zeus and his siblings won, and Saturn, Kronos, is banished for his actions. And so as I've been saying throughout telling the story, there's a lot of parallels here with Kronos and Saturn, and more directly in relation to this episode with Capricorn, right? These through lines, these threads of what we understand Capricorn to mean being very interwoven with the myths of Kronos and Uranus and Zeus. This interweaving, who has authority? Who's in control? How is that responsibility achieved? What does it look like? Who's in charge? Very much that Capricornian, Saturnian, Kronos energy. All right, so switching gears once again, as I have done in previous episodes, I'm going to offer you up a guided meditation to help you connect with Capricorn, help you unpack some of your own relationship with the sign and even work with the sign in some ways so that you have a personal connection with it, that it's not just what I'm saying, but your own lived experience with the archetype. So we'll start with some belly breaths before I lead you up and down the chakra system, and then guide you through a guided meditation, guided imagery exercise to develop your own relationship with Capricorn. And if you haven't listened to previous episodes or haven't done belly breaths before, belly breathing is a slow-paced, deep breathing exercise where we slowly inhale through the nose, pause for a moment, exhale through the mouth, pause again, and repeat 4 times is how I'll be doing it. And you don't need to be in your head about it and counting. I'll do the counting for you and pacing for you. And before we begin, you're welcome to pause. You want to find a place for this meditation, for this guided imagery work, where you can sit comfortably for about 20 minutes. You don't want to have wherever you're sitting or however you're sitting to pull you out of the experience. So I recommend that you probably have some back support if you feel that that's something you need if you're going to sit still for 20 minutes. You can be in a chair, you could be on the floor, you could be on a meditation cushion, but you want to make sure that there's somewhere that you're comfortable for about 20 minutes. I do recommend sitting as opposed to lying down, particularly for Capricorn, because Capricorn is the skeletal system. You want to really be present in your structure in a way that lying down doesn't necessarily cultivate in the same way. Okay, So we're going to start with the belly breaths, and you're going to want to close your eyes. Again, just to help keep you present in the moment and not being distracted by the things around you. So with your eyes closed, you're going to want to inhale through your nose for the count of 4 and really fill your whole body with oxygen. 1, 2, 3, 4. And pause. And exhaling through the mouth completely. 1, 2, 3, 4. And pause. And inhaling again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause. And exhale again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause. Inhaling again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause. Last time, inhaling deeply. 1, 2, 3, 4. And pause. Exhale completely. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause. And now, bringing your breathing back to a natural rhythm, but still consciously, still paced. In a pace, a rhythm, a depth that feels comfortable. So on your next inhale, you're going to bring your attention to base chakra, root chakra. This is the energy center, the chakra center, the base of the spine. It's how we ground, how we stay present, connect with the earth, Pachamama, Mother Earth. It's linked with discipline in many ways, very Capricornian as a center. Feel it ground you to the earth. And on your next inhale, you want to bring your attention to sacral chakra, second chakra. This is the center below the belly button, linked, often associated with the genitals, with reproduction, with identity, who we are, our sense of self. It's tied to our ability to be receptive and directive, when to act and when to pause. And on your next inhale, bring your attention to solar plexus chakra. This is the chakra below the rib cage, above the belly button, sort of in between the two. We often think of as sort of our gut reaction to the world lives in the solar plexus. And the solar plexus is a source of power. We see that even in the etymology. Solar, sun, center. The solar plexus is personal power. It's connected with emotions, our emotional power, our ability to connect with our feelings and use that as a drive. And on your next inhale, bring your attention to heart chakra, just over the heart, center of the chest. It is the center of the chakra system as well. It is the midpoint between the lower and upper chakras. Heart-centered is very much tied with this chakra. This heart chakra is how we love, whom we love, our ability to express that love, our ability to receive love warmly, openly, without fear, without resistance, compassion and empathy. Live in the heart chakra. Self-love, self-value. And on your next inhale, bring your attention to throat chakra, just in the middle of the throat. This is a center tied to our communication, speaking our truths, speaking up, being willing to listen as well, how we receive what other people are saying, our responses, our reactions to what we hear, all reside here in this center. And on your next inhale, bring your attention to third eye chakra, just in the forehead, in between the eyebrows. This is the center of wisdom, perception, how we see the world, how we can see the world objectively as well, unfiltered, without bias. Perspective, vision, all live in this center. And on your next inhale, bring your attention to crown chakra. This is the crown of the head, top of the head chakra. It is our connection to, tethered to the divine, God, goddess, spirit, universe, whatever your language for the divine is. It is from this center that you can connect directly to source. This is the center that is our tether, our connection to, and our reflection of our own divinity, our own divine self. And feeling that energy, feeling that center start to percolate, start to connect to the oneness from which we all come. We're going to bring that energy back down through the chakra system, helping to clear out any of the stuckness, any of the cobwebs, the imbalances throughout the chakra system, so that when we move into the guided meditation, you go into it with a new level of balance and clarity and divine protection. And so bringing this light down, this white light, golden light, down from the divine, from the crown, bring it out and in and through the third eye. Let it clear away things that have been challenging to look at. Maybe things where you'd rather turn away. Close your eyes from. Let it heal those areas. Clear out the shadowy places that you've rather not looked, so that you can look with clarity at the world, at your life. And on your next inhale, you want to bring that divine golden healing light through and around the throat chakra, healing challenges of speaking truths, being willing to listen to hard ones. Let it be a salve to your throat, healing the rough edges. And on your next inhale, continuing to bring that golden light down, bring it into your heart, enveloping it, hugging it, healing heartbreaks and heartaches, issues around fear, around loneliness. Let this golden light heal and hold you. And on your next inhale, continuing to bring that light down, bring that into your solar plexus. Balancing emotional imbalances, healing areas where you have struggled to stand in your power, fearful of what you might do or how it will be received. Let it bring into alignment your ability to be radiant and powerful without ego. And on your next inhale, bringing your attention to sacral chakra, second chakra. This golden light help to balance in your body, in your life, where you can be overly passive or overly directive. For both are needed, but having a healthy relationship with each helps you to walk through life more effectively. Have it heal issues around personal identity, who you are, letting you feel comfortable being your true self, whoever that is. And on your next inhale, bringing your attention and the golden light all the way down now to root chakra, base chakra. Let this golden light help to ground you, help to have you have a healthy relationship with stability, with grounding, so that you are neither stuck nor too moving, too uncentered, too scattered. This golden light can bring into harmony, balance, stability without stuckness. And it tethers you from Pachamama, Mother Earth, grounding energy, and the sky. Mother Earth, Father Sky are now running energy through your own chakra system, tethering them to each other, circling up and down the chakra system, encircling you, cocooning you in a bubble of golden, protective, healing light as we move into the guided imagery. And bringing your attention back up to third eye, your mind's eye. In your mind's eye, see yourself on a wooden path, trees dancing in the wind. And as you walk, you notice the ground is slowly beginning to slope upwards. With a soft breeze blowing around you, the leaves of the trees rustle, beckoning you forward as you slowly make your way up a ridge that you are now climbing. And with each step upon Mother Earth, you find yourself more and more present, more and more aware of your surroundings. And despite the increasing slope of the ground, you confidently walk onward. And after having walked for some time, you find you have come to an outcropping where the trees have thinned and there is a large stone slab beneath your feet. And standing on this stone, this outcropping, you see a sage, an old man wearing a cloak, looking as though he is from another time. Another phase of human life. He is not from the modern world. And standing there, as he does, waiting for you, he leans on a staff, or maybe it's a tall walking stick that supports this elder who has met you today. And facing you, you make eye contact, and his eyes convey a deep wisdom that assures you that he only has your best intentions. For he has met you here today to answer any questions you have regarding your relationship with authority, your authority, that of others in your life, your relationship with boundaries and control and recognition. He is here today to offer his wisdom. And slowly you begin a conversation so that you can understand the times in your life where you felt powerless, or that your power was being squelched, or afraid to step into power, unsure what a healthy version of that looked like. And so you shrank yourself or put up walls so that your power could not be usurped. What advice does this wise man have for you today to help you deconstruct these walls so that you can stand solidly in your knowledge, in your expertise, in a place of self-assuredness without fear of repercussions, but also without coming from a place of control? How can you take down these walls that maybe once were necessary for protection, but now impede your evolution, your growth, the possibilities that await you? Are there areas in your life where you've been too rigid or too guarded? What does he recommend that you do or say so that you can uphold healthy boundaries while still creating space for others and your own growth? If you found yourself uncomfortable stepping into a place of authority, personal power, empowerment, what does he recommend you do to step in to authentic authority? Not to be controlling, but to be comfortable taking charge, taking the lead when necessary or called upon. How can you authentically step into a place of personal empowerment, letting your greatness shine while simultaneously grounded in humility? If in the past you have struggled to feel confident in sharing your expertise, what recommendations does he have for you to feel more self-assured in letting the world know what you have accomplished? Not from a place of ego, but so that what you have to offer is recognized and valued. And if you have found it challenging to create a work-life balance, burdened by your responsibilities, what recommendations does he have to bring this into greater balance, greater harmony? So that you can remain accountable and responsible, but not feel burdened. And let other questions come up organically, asking for clarity whenever needed. And as your conversation starts to come to its natural end, ask him how you can reconnect when you find yourself struggling to uphold your healthy boundaries, or have a healthy relationship with your power, or are struggling with everything you are responsible for. When those challenges circle back around, how can you reconnect with this elder for additional support at another time and place? Is there something you can do that will help you to remember the answers you have received today, the support you have received today? And thanking him for his insight and support. See if there's a way he would like you to honor him, his help today. How can you show gratitude? What reciprocity would this elder like in exchange for his support? And parting in whatever way feels appropriate. Slowly make your way back down the ridge you have climbed. Back to the flat path, meandering through the woods. And slowly making your way back into the room, back into your body. Slowly moving fingers and toes and opening your eyes whenever you are ready. And perhaps sitting here for another moment or two, I recommend you grab a journal or perhaps your phone to make note of what came through today, what insights you received. Thank you so much for joining me today on the 10th show of Cosmic Costumes. Please like and subscribe to Mythic Sky Storytime wherever you get your podcasts. And to learn more about me or my work, please visit mythicsky.com.